So I'm going to try to wrap up this little series inspired by George Orwell's work and then trying to kind of compare it to what's actually occurring in the country. Uh, so, what I believe we're at is the various factions of the left right now are kind of moving in lockstep. They're working with each other uh, to essentially try to move the ball forward. Now, the general movement of progressivism in this country has kind of been a pendulum swing where they advance forward, get their goals, and then they reach a point where they've overstepped. The populace reacts, and then they realize, okay, we've overstepped. Time to dig in for a while, and then they essentially let conservatives hold the line for a while, and you never really see much in the way of retrenchment. What I think ended up changing was in the lead up, the years leading up to Obama being elected and then finally his election. The primary tactic the left used to keep all its coalitions together was the boogeyman of racism. They essentially made racism a far worse problem than it was. And they could be convinced because if you could just say, well, if the results don't look like the population, you can always assume that the cause is racist. So there was this vast secret racist army out there that was always holding them back. And this was, advantageous to them because when you have an enemy, it keeps people focused. And when the enemy's kind of invisible, you can exaggerate its size, purpose, and capability. Very good for keeping the voters in line to where they show up at the elections and keeps them donating money. Now, mind you, not everybody on the left believed in this vast racist conspiracy. It was a tool, but there were enough of them that did. So what ends up happening when Obama gets elected, you have a situation where the people on the left went, holy crap, we won. If we have a person of color as president, that means we've overwhelmed the racists. They'll never be able to wield power ever again. And so they reached this idea that all utopian systems get to where they believe they've reached the end of history, where they don't have to worry about struggle against opposing forces anymore. They believe that they've achieved so much power that they're just going to march ever forward in a straight line, doing exactly what they want as they want it. So they appointed Hillary as Obama's successor. And the absolute surety that she couldn't lose under any circumstance is evidence of the mindset they were in. It wasn't just merely media projecting power in order to convince people that she could win. The belief was actually there. It's evidence all over what was happening at the time in the terms of legacy news. So when she didn't win, it basically caused this almost collective break, mental breakdown. And the result was that instead of the typically at a point where someone like Trump would have been elected, the left would have said, oh, especially the progressives, and said, oh, we went too far. Okay, so we need to dig in for a little while, bide our time until we can get one of our people in charge again, and then we start moving forward again. But this time they didn't. They kept agitating and pushing because of this mindset. They thought they'd reached the end of history, and they couldn't wrap their brain around the idea that they hadn't, that they weren't there yet. And this creates a very dangerous situation that we have now, where we have currently a president who seems to not have the mental faculties to be running things. So it's clearly his staff doing a lot of the work. You have former presidents being indicted. You have uh, members of the president's family under investigation, potentially to be indicted, and possibly these spinning further into the sphere of the executive branch, possibly all the way to the top. So this creates a very dangerous situation. If the coalition of the left isn't willing to, at some point, say, we've reached the line where we need to take a rest and let the country, rest until we make our next move forward, they're going to reach this point where you're going to have a chunk of the population that's not going to be willing to accept continued progressive movement. The question is how big that group is. So if we look at the left, we talked about essentially the progressives, the liberals, the democratic socialists, the Marxists. Okay, all believe they're more or less in control of each other. They all kind of think they're driving the car. And under most circumstances, it's always the progressives who are running things. The other groups are allowed to play along as long as they're useful. That's why groups like Antifa and stuff and BLM have been allowed to do what they've been doing, is because the progressives are convinced that they can't push their agenda in a direction that's not progressive. So if somehow this whole coalition continues to hold together and push forward, the end result is going to be a more authoritarian government than we have now. Not dramatically, but it's going to continue this progression. And they may actually keep pushing forward, even though we may be across the line that they should have stopped that a while ago. As long as the progressives hold up on top of this, we essentially will have a slowly, incrementally increasing authoritarian government. But the fact that we're on the wrong side of the line and the progressives are continuing to push, this does have the strong possibility of causing destabilizing domestic terrorism. That's a fairly high level of likelihood. Now, we could degenerate into something as bad as something similar to a Spanish Civil War, but I consider that an outlier. It's not it's possible, but it's not very likely at this point. But things can change rapidly. Now, if the coalition of the progressives hold together and somehow one of the other factions comes out on top, then we will have civil war, and it will be like the Spanish Civil War, where you literally have factions breaking apart into multiple factions, to where you have 4 or 5 different groups fighting for control. Now, it won't be outright necessarily. It definitely will not look like the original American Civil War, and it might not be absolutely outright where there's constant fighting. It may just be a constant low rumbling of terrorism going on, the various groups trying to strike out at each other. Now, if the left coalition completely flies apart, and we are seeing a lot of pushback from the right, there is always the possibility of the only way I can really think to describe it properly is a reactionary movement occurring. It'd be some form of possibly neoconservatism merged with populism, and things are rapidly moving in the political arena. So what this final group looks like, it's hard to say. But their goals will definitely be to try to shift the way government looks back to an earlier state, thus reactionary. This reactionary movement uh, could very well be peaceful, but the question is how does the left, if there's a reactionary movement coming out on top, how does the left react to it? If the left reacts violently, then civil war. If only factions of the left react violently, then essentially a period of domestic terrorism. If the reactionary movement is strong, we get a new type of government. Hard to say exactly how it comes out, because when political movements are coalesced under situations like this, they can also, even from the right, become authoritarian or a different form of authoritarianism. So, what would Orwell think of what we all got going on here? Well, he wouldn't recognize it as anything approaching 1984 or Animal Farm or anything else like that. He might see elements of the precursors of the Spanish Civil War. Unfortunately, he had some remembrances there that he really probably should committed to paper that we aren't going to know about. He made I can't remember the precise quote, but it was something to the effect of that because of the way history is being rewritten on the fly, people are never going to know what actually went on here. So, hope that gives you an idea where I think we're going. I don't see a bright socialist future in the near term. I see most likely a more progressive government, probably. Instability, likely. Massive instability, possible. Outlier, but possible. All right. If you have any questions about what we were talking about, throw them down in the comment section and I'll try to answer them. Please smash the like button. If the YouTube algorithm brought you here and you're not a regular subscriber, please look at my titles and consider subscribing to my channel. And if you know someone who might find this interesting, please share it with them. Thank you for spending time with me this evening. Hope to see you again in a future video.